Okay, thank you for being here. It's been on my heart for a while that I needed to share my testimony. Our Heavenly Father has been pressing that on me for a while, that I need to go through and share my whole testimony. I've put it off, to be honest, because it could be a very long video. It could be a very long conversation. And so I didn't really know where to begin and what to include and what to not include and what was important and what was not important. So when I was praying about it today, he just put on my heart to just start speaking and telling my story, and he will direct the conversation where it needs to go. So I'm going to share my testimony with you today about my walk with Yeshua. Jesus is his Greek name. Is it Greek? Jesus, Iosis. I call him Yeshua. Yeshua means Yah's salvation in Hebrew. So when he walked this earth, his mother would have likely called him Yeshua. So I call him Yeshua. There was no J at the time that he walked the earth. That was a later invention. So I do not usually, when I say the name Jesus, it's usually so that people aren't confused, because they know who Jesus is usually, but not many people. A lot more now than 5 years ago, but not as many people know who Yeshua is, right? So I just want to just give you that disclaimer, because I am going to share this video with people that are not going to know necessarily what Yeshua means. So when I say Yeshua, I mean the man who came and died on the cross for us and rose again in 3 days to redeem us back, purchase us back to the Father, so that we can be back in right relationship with the Father. Okay, that's who I'm referring to. I worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the God of the Bible. And I try my best to worship him in the way that the Bible instructs, and not to add man's theology to that. And I'm going to talk about my process of going from a regular Christian to more of a observant, obedient Christian. I do obey the Sabbath and other things like that to the best of my human abilities and understanding, right? So let's start with, so awkward. What do I tell you guys? So let's start with my childhood. Okay. I am going to cover, so trigger warnings. I'm going to cover essay in this video. I'm going to cover some things. I'm going to cover, sorry, I should probably use a different word for that. What word do they use for code for that? I don't know. I'm going to cover unaliving and some other things. So if that deeply triggers you, I hope you will stay and work through that, because I think that there's a lot here for you. I used to be deeply triggered by many things, and I am not anymore because of my walk with Yeshua. So let's start with my childhood. So I grew up in a good family. My parents are amazing people. I have absolutely amazing family members. However, I was at a very young age. I believe I was about 8. I was in grade 3. When it happened, I blocked it out completely blocked it out. I remember the moments leading up to it very specifically. How rude. Very specifically, I remember the moments leading up to it, and then I remember the moments after, but I don't remember the events of the event, okay? Let's just pray, just so we're not interrupted all the time by demonic forces. Heavenly Father, I just want to pray over this broadcast. I pray that it reaches the ears that you want it to reach. I pray that it helps the people you want it to help. I pray that you remove every witch and warlock that's trying to interfere with this broadcast. I pray, Father, that you bind them from distraction, or bind them from casting spells, bind them from cursing, anyone who's cursing in their heart and their mind. I just pray that they are removed, Father. I pray that you send this video out to the appropriate people that need to hear it, that need to know your truth and your gospel. In Yeshua's mighty name, amen. Okay, so that's better. Okay, so I blocked it out for a long part of my life. So from the moment that it happened, there are a few days after, I have some very specific details that I remember, very vivid details of things that happened afterwards. And I'm not going to go into the details because you guys don't need to know that. But I blocked it then at that point for my entire teenage years, my youth growing up. I blocked it probably until I was around 22. I think the memories started to resurface, and then I had to deal with those memories as they resurfaced. Another thing from my childhood is we did grow up a bit Catholic. I want to say lukewarm Catholic. So we grew up, my mom got involved with the Catholic Church for a while. We did the whole Catholic Church thing for a little bit. I was confirmed. I did go to Catholic school for a hot minute. During my time that I went to Catholic school, I actually made a really good friend in the Catholic school. And this was around grade 3 and 4. And she was actually a mainstream Christian, but she didn't, because we didn't have a mainstream Christian school in the area at the time. She came to the Catholic school. Her parents thought that would be better than going to the regular school. So she came to our regular Catholic school. Her and I ended up becoming really good friends. And then I went to her house for a few times for dinner and hang out or whatever. And one thing I noticed, I remember distinctly, is when I went to her house and they were playing Christian worship music or something like that, it would distinctly feel different. It was a feeling that I had never experienced before. So that was one of my first encounters with feeling the Holy Spirit, with feeling the Spirit moving in a house, or just noticing the difference, because my house felt a certain way and it was peaceful. It was fine. My house was fine, but my house felt a certain way. But then when I went to their house, it felt entirely different, right? Later on, my mom also took me to visit a friend for like a play date, around the same age, maybe a little bit older. And during this play date, I also noticed the same feeling. I was downstairs playing with the children, and then I went upstairs, and the lady that my mom had come to hang out with and her were having coffee or whatever, and they were talking. And when I came upstairs, I noticed this feeling of the Holy Spirit again. I didn't know what to call it then, but it just felt different in their house. And I really noticed it when I went upstairs. Later on in the car, my mom and I were talking, and I asked her, why does their house feel different than our house? And she was really confused by my question. And I remember asking her, it felt different. There was a different feeling there. And she said, I don't know. We were talking about Jesus when you came upstairs. Maybe that was it. I was like, that's interesting. So they were also a more mainstream Christian family. So we grew up Catholic, and so I got confirmed in the Catholic Church. I did the First Communion. I did a lot of the Catholic stuff. My great-grandma on my mom's side came over from Poland when she was very young. I think her parents came over from Poland. And she got married very, very young, and she was Catholic, okay? Her and her husband were both from Poland, I think. Anyways, that's where the Catholicism entered kind of the chat at that point. And also my mom had a friend who was really into Catholicism, and because her friend really brought her into the church and stuff. So that was a period of our life, probably 5 or 6 years. We were not the type of people that went every week to Catholic church. We went maybe once or twice a month. And when we did go, like, my brothers and I were probably a nightmare. Like, I remember going to Catholic church and my brother, like, just being all over the place, not able to sit still. Catholic church is a long process. It's a long time, and you're doing the kneeling and you do all these little rituals, right? I remember us like dancing back and forth. Like, we're both later diagnosed with ADHD. I'll get into that later. But we could not sit still through that. My brother less so than me. And I remember us really arguing not to go all the time. So that was our Catholic church experience. That kind of just fizzled out over time. We just stopped going. It stopped being a part of our life. And then we were very secular. And so for the rest of my years, we moved out to the country. I grew up on a farm, and it wasn't a farm, it was like acreage, but surrounded by farm. Went to a farm school. And for that period of time, we didn't really go to church at all in any way. So around that time, I'm going to try to go chronologically here. Around that time, I was about 12 or 13. And around the time that I was 12 or 13, I have this distinct memory of being obsessed with Middle East politics and feeling like, deep in my spirit, feeling like I needed to understand and figure out Middle East politics. I'm 12 years old, 13 years old. I remember opening up the newspaper, and I was reading the newspaper, and I was trying to read about the Middle East. We didn't have internet back then. That's how old I am, by the way. I read about the Middle East and try to figure out what was going on. Obviously, it was not something that I was figuring out, but I did have this distinct desire around that age to figure out Middle East politics for some reason. I felt like it was important to understand. Something in my heart felt like it was important to understand. The other thing that happened around that age is I got really, really obsessed with the Holocaust and with reading Holocaust information, reading books about the Holocaust, researching the Holocaust, watching movies, just ingraining all that information and researching all that information. And of course, again, we didn't have the internet, so I was reading a lot of books on it. I went obviously to see Schindler's List and a lot of these things. For some reason, I had this urge to know about these things, okay? And this will make sense, obviously, later in my life with what we're doing now. Okay, so what happened after that? Sorry, I didn't plan this out, so I might not be concise, so bear with me. Later on, so I was bullied really hard, bullied really bad in middle school, really, really bad. Because I have always been exactly how weird I am now, exactly how strange I am now. I am officially on the spectrum, diagnosed on the spectrum, but I don't consider that. That's almost another video. I would talk about ADHD and autism and stuff like that. But it's not something I label myself with as an issue, okay? But I understand also that the spectrum is a spectrum and some people have tougher issues to deal with than I do. I'm kind of in the, in a certain range where I'm very able to cope with a lot of things, and some things I'm not able to cope with as well. And I have a lot of awkward behaviors, which I didn't learn about and I didn't understand until I was older. My experience was I didn't know how to filter these things and mask these things so that I would be accepted by the mass majority of people. But now I realize that I'm just not like the mass majority of people, and that's okay, because I have my people, and thankfully we have the internet. I have all of you, and I have found my people that understand it and they get it, right? But when I was growing up, I wasn't able to mask these things. So often my gifts, my God-given gifts of, being able to see in the spirit, being able to know things that I shouldn't know. One thing that I tend to have is just a knowing about things that I shouldn't know. And this has come up and caused me to be bullied on many occasions. But I remember I went to figure skating camp. So I used to figure skate. I went to figure skating camp one summer, and I was in with this group of people that I'd never met before. Okay, all these girls we were all skating together every day, but I was from another town that I went to this figure skating camp in. And so nobody in this camp knew me. I didn't know any of them. I didn't know their backstories. I didn't know anything about them. So I go to this figure skating camp, and I'm there for a couple of weeks. Still don't really know too much about these people. And these girls were talking about this other girl and about how she, something about this other girl. And I just said, I blurted it out. I had no filter. And I said, oh no, she's dating that guy. I didn't know these people. I didn't know who they were. And I just said it. I just knew it, and I said it. And they looked at me like I was absolutely bonkers, right? But it turns out I was right. They had been secretly dating, and nobody knew it yet. And then it came out that they were actually dating, secretly dating. I didn't even know these people. I just overheard this conversation. And stuff like that would happen to me all the time. And I didn't know to filter these things, to not say them out loud, because sometimes people would not necessarily take you saying certain things that well. So I did have a whole phase of my life, especially in my youth, where I had to learn how to be normal in a way, right? Be more mainstream just to fit in. And so during my teenage years, I would say grade 6 to about grade 9, I was heavily bullied. I was bullied to the point where the entire class on a note in grade 6 wrote their names on a note telling me that they hated me, that they didn't like me, and that they hated me, and they all signed it. The entire class signed it and put it in my locker. And not only did they do this, they put tape on it so that I couldn't rip up the note. So they took the paper and put tape on it, and so I couldn't, and they put it in my locker. And this was like just part of the bullying. It got to the point where I would just eat my lunch in the bathroom. I would hide in the bathroom and eat my lunch so that I didn't have to deal with people and the bullying and just the little comments and all the rejection and stuff like that. And it was just because, I don't know if it was spiritual or if it was just because I was different or whatever. It wasn't like today where kids are taught to be more accepting of other people that are different or other people that aren't the same as them or that have challenges. It was so different back then when I grew up. Bullying was normal. Bullying was what you did, So definitely, I'm trying to remember other things that happened, but I guess you don't really need to relive that stuff. I'm still friends with a lot of those people that I went to school with, though. They're all good people. I've forgiven all of them. And I hope if there's anything I did that they forgive me. It was just that age. Just went through that age, right? Okay, so then get through my teenage years, all is well. And then it was about my 20s that I started to really have a desire to understand who God was, okay? So I went... Yeah, I guess you guys don't need to know like all the little details of my life, but I went tree planting. So I was tree planting I don't know if you guys know what tree planting is. It's like a thing you do in Canada when you're in college and stuff. So I went to college, I went to tree planting. I lived a very normal secular high school life, partying, having drinks, going to parties. In my generation, and it's very different now because my daughter now is 16 and she's no interest in drinking. She tells me she has no interest in drinking. She doesn't go to parties. She doesn't care. It's also because she grew up, in a different environment, but also when our generation, I'm like on the cusp of millennial Gen X. So our generation, that's what you did. You went drinking, you went partying. We had bush parties. You go to the bush party and you party. That's what we did. From grade 9 onward, on the weekends, we would be going out. I grew up in farm area. So you would go out and you'd find a field with some trees and you would have a bonfire and you would party. That's what we did in that generation, right? We didn't have phones. None of it's recorded, thankfully. Thankfully. That's just, that's all we had to do, right? It was just different. Farm, especially in like the rural life. And I think the city kids were partying too, but it was just different. So definitely grew up around a lot of drinking and partying. Not my parents or anything. My parents were very straight-laced. But like my brothers and us, like that's just what you did, in high school and stuff back then. So graduated, went tree planting, went to college, all of that. And that was fine. Lived very much in the world. So when I started to remember, when was that? Was it before or after? Trying to place the timeline. Okay, so I lived in the Arctic for a year. I went up and I went with my best friend at the time and lived in the Arctic for a year. And that was very, very interesting. Lots of learning and growth happened there. I was bartending. We were making really good money, like really, really good money. I wish I would have invested that money instead of spending it. And there was an oil and gas boom happening up there. So they were doing oil and gas exploration. So we were making really, really good money. And just kind of living in the world. Again, we were drinking a lot. We were partying a lot. And that was pretty much all we did. We didn't have any real hobbies. We were kind of idiots, to be honest. I I have some really embarrassing stories. And I am so thankful. I'm sure you people that are around my age understand like how thankful you are that camera phones did not exist when we were young and stupid. I'm sure you agree with me. So it was around that time where I met this girl named Darla. Now, my friend Darla, I'm still friends with her today. I just actually, we had a short little conversation last summer. We're not friends in that we talk all the time, but we're still connected, and we do still connect with each other once in a while. Darla and her brother came up to the Arctic to work. Darla worked with me in the bar, and her brother worked somewhere else. I don't recall. He ended up doing some building or something up there. Darla and her brother were born again Christians, and their parents were pastors that ran a church in Salmon Arm, BC. So their parents ran this church, and I ended up being friends with Darla and Darson, and they were the nicest people, really got along with them, ended up being pretty close to them. And so when we finally left the Arctic, I drove back down with Darson and another girl, and we drove all the way down to Alberta through the Arctic. So we left from Inuvik. If you look at a map, Inuvik, there's Tuktoyaktuk, which is on the Beaufort Sea, and then you have Inuvik, and then there's a long highway. It's like a dirt road that you can only travel certain times of the year. And so we drove down that dirt road in the spring all the way down to Alberta, where I was living at the time, and they dropped me off there. So we all ended up being friends, and I ended up later, when I was traveling out to the West Coast, I ended up staying at Darla and Darson's house a couple times. So the first time that I stayed there, I was actually heartbroken because there was this man that I really had a thing for, and he was older than me. I think I was probably 24 and he was 32. And I mean, it's a pretty good difference, but he was definitely like in a different place in his life than I was. But anyways, I had a lot of feelings for him, and I was heartbroken because we weren't going to be together, etc., etc. And during that time, I ended up going to Darla and Darson's house and met their other brother. And their other brother is a Christian music. Why am I blanking on his name right now? Dan Bremnes. He's a Christian musician. You can just Google him, Dan Bremnes. So Darson, Dan, and Darla, they all still lived at home at that time. I think Darla was just about to get married pretty soon after that. And so I went and stayed at their place. They had a bread and breakfast in the basement. I went and stayed there with their mom and their dad, and their mom and their dad were pastors. Now, I was experiencing so much spiritual warfare at this time. I remember one Sunday they were waking me up to go to church, and like I just couldn't get out of bed. And I didn't even understand it. Like, it was so rude of me. I was staying at their house, and I couldn't even get out of bed to go to church. And it was just the spiritual warfare around the whole situation. So I spent a couple of days there, and I remember talking to their mom, and she was with some friends, and they were talking about all this like spiritual gifts and all this stuff. And I was kind of being a bit of a bee, if you know what I'm saying, about it. I was like, oh, this is just basic psychology. You're just talking about psychology, but you just call it spiritual stuff. I was being really rude. I'm surprised they didn't kick me out of their house, but I think they knew spiritually, like I was battling. So I ended up leaving their house a couple of days later, and I kind of started to feel really bad. I was like, I was kind of rude. But what they had said and the things that had been around with them really sat with me. It really stayed with me. And as I was driving, I was heading out to the West Coast because I had gotten a job on the West Coast on Vancouver Island. And I was driving out there, and I had this like deep sense of like, there's something to this. And I remembered at that time, I remembered back to the times that I had visited other people's houses, and they had that different spirit in their house, right? From my childhood. And I remembered that feeling. And I was like, it's the same feeling that I feel in their house that I had felt in all these other houses the same feeling from my childhood, that peace and whatever that was, that love and that peace that was in their house, that my family had love and they were lovely, but we didn't have that same spirit in our house, right? And so as I was driving to the West Coast, I turned on the Christian radio and I started listening to Christian radio. I was like, okay, well, let's just, whatever this is, there's something to it. They have something that I don't have and I want it. And so I turned on the Christian radio and I started listening to Christian radio, trying to figure this out, right? And then they had a prayer call on the Christian radio for giving your life to Jesus at the time, right? Everyone used Jesus at the time. Yeshua was not a thing then. So I prayed along with this prayer call and gave my life to Jesus, right? I invited Jesus into my heart. I said the sinner's prayer, yada, yada. I did the thing, right? And so if you are out here listening to this video, what you do is you say, Father, I have sinned. I have been sinning my whole life. I have been living separate from you. I believe that Jesus died on the cross and he rose again 3 days later. And I believe that he died to redeem us back to you so that we can be in right relationship with you. He paid the cost so that we can be in relationship with you. And I want you to change my life. I want you to be in my life. I want you to teach me your ways. And just pray that prayer sincerely to him, and he will step into your life. He needs you to open the door, to knock. You need to knock and the door will be opened. He needs you to invite him into your life. He's not going to force his way in. So if you feel at some point that you want to understand deeper, just invite him to show you, invite him into your life in every area, okay? So that's what I did. I said a prayer, and then I did immediately feel a change. I did immediately feel more of a peace in my life. But I was headed to the West Coast, and I was headed to the middle of nowhere to work on the West Coast Trail, on the end of the West Coast Trail. And I was going to be in an area that there was no churches, no other believers, again, middle of nowhere area. And that's where I was going to be for the next few years. So I drove, and it's a place called Port Renfrew. You can look it up on a map if you want, Port Renfrew, British Columbia. And so I got there, I started my job. I had a wonderful time. It was a great experience. But I still did not know what to do as a Christian. So I was a Christian now. I was a Christian, but I had no discipleship. I had nobody to teach me or tell me what to do. I was in this small town with no church. We did have a church, but nobody opened the church doors and said, it was like an old church in the town, but nobody ever went into it, right? So, and I was an hour and a half drive, I think it was, to the nearest town. So, and I was working a lot, so it just wasn't going to happen that I was going to go to church or anything like that. So during this time, I was a Christian per se, but I didn't really know how to be a Christian. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I remember buying this book from the Christian bookstore at some point, and it was The Purpose-Driven Life. And I remember trying to read this book and trying to figure it out. I'm just going to mute this person. Can know when somebody's got a demon operating, right? So where was I? So I bought this book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and I was trying to figure out how do I be a Christian? And this book was not helping me. I never thought maybe get a Bible. No, how do I be a Christian? I got to get this other book. It was the most popular book at the time. And I tried to do a few things in it, but it didn't make sense to me, and I didn't really understand. So, and I never bought a Bible. I think I had a Bible at one point that was given to me or whatever, but I didn't have a Bible at that time. So I never thought, hey, read the Bible, actually just read the scriptures. Anyway, so I kind of just went about, so I was a Christian, but I was living like I normally lived. I was still struggling in all the ways that I normally struggle. It was a bit less. And he started to show me things and started to teach me things, but I still didn't understand a lot, especially not to the level that I understand now. Eventually, I ended up leaving that area and moving closer to town, to the big town. And during that time, when I moved closer, oh my gosh, I could tell you guys so many crazy stories. Was it that first? Yeah. Okay. The first thing that happened is I was living in this area called French Beach. See, I knew this was going to be so long if I got into this stuff. Okay, so I was living in this area called French Beach. French Beach, we found out later, is a high witchcraft area. There's a lot of witchcraft that was done around French Beach area. My partner at the time, he was down at the beach, a little tiny beach called Flea Beach, right beside our house. And he was just hanging out down there at Flea Beach, and he found this crystal. It was like this big quartz crystal, just randomly in the water on the beach. And he kept it and brought it back to our house. This crystal is going to come up later, so just remember this crystal for later. So we brought this crystal back into our house, and as soon as this crystal came back into our house, all HE double hockey sticks, like this thing, I don't know what it had attached to it, but it was like something was attached to it and brought it back into our house. So him and I were both lukewarm Christians that didn't know what we were doing. That is my dad, and that's why I want to be careful about what I say, because I don't want to ever be speaking about somebody else's life, and that's what's kind of difficult. Like, I don't want to be a bad witness or a good witness, or like, it's like their business. I don't want to share other people's business, right? So anyways, we ended up together. We went through many trials, and we ended up not making it through those trials. We ended up having to separate. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there because I don't want to talk about his business. I don't have a problem talking about my business, but I don't want to speak about somebody else's business, right? I want to be really careful about that, which is hard, which is why I was concerned about, like, how do I give my testimony? How do I give my testimony without including other people's business, right? It's really difficult because obviously you have people that have been big factors in your life. Okay, so we were very lukewarm. We were living in sin. We got pregnant. We had a child. Before I got pregnant, though, we had moved to a different house just up the road. And it was at this house that I was out running one day. So I was out running one day, and I felt this incredible urge that I needed to reach out. Remember Darla, her mom from earlier in this story? I needed to reach out to Darla's mom and tell her that I had accepted Christ, that I was a Christian, and that we were trying to figure it out. I had this deep urge. And even at this point in my Christian walk, we were living together in sin. We weren't married. Like all this stuff, I still didn't understand, that we're supposed to walk in the commandments. Even after all of this, I don't know why my brain never grasped it, but I just never did. So I'm running on the beach. I get this urge that I needed to reach out to Darla's mom and tell her that I had accepted Christ, and to thank her for being faithful and sharing Yeshua with me, sharing who Christ was with me, even though I was being obnoxious at her house. And I had this deep urge that I needed to do that. And so much so that I'd stopped my run and I was like crying and weeping, just feeling the Holy Spirit on me. And so I went back to the house and I delayed on it. I did not do the thing that she had been pressing on me to do. And I have done this several times in my life, and I repent, Father, I sometimes procrastinate on these things and I delay. And I truly repent, Father, of that. So I delayed and I didn't know what to say. I was not as bold like I am now, where I can just say stuff. I was very young and very timid, and I didn't know what to say to her, right? So I procrastinated. 8 days later, she was hit by a semi-truck and died instantly. 8 days later. And I still remember this moment because I found out. I got it in an email from Darla. Again, at that time we didn't have cell phones, right? So it was emails. I got it from an email from her daughter that her mom had just been hit by a semi-truck and she died instantly. And in that moment, I knew that Abba had told me, obviously, to reach out to her because it was going to be, her time was about to be up. And so that was him telling me that her time was going to be, was about to be up. I've had this happen 2 other times in life where he's told me somebody was going to die. So 3 times total, four times. That one kind of doesn't count, but 3 times for sure total that I have been told that somebody's going to die before they die. And shown sometimes exactly how it's going to happen. Twice I've been shown exactly how it's going to happen. And the 3 times have come to pass since then. One of them took 10 years. It was 10 years from the time that he gave me the vision of how this person was going to die. And then 10 years later, they died in the exact way that I had that the vision was given to me. Yeah. So that was heavy because it's like, well, what do I do with this information? And even now to this day, I'm still figuring out, like, what do you do with this? If you get, like, am I supposed to pray? And that's what, if you do get a vision like that, you should always pray and ask him what he wants you to do with that information. Because I didn't know at that time, like, you know that Bible verse, my people perish for lack of knowledge. I didn't know what to do with that information that I was being given, right? A lot of the time. So I think too, just being obedient, what he's asked you to do is also really important. Like if he's asked you to do something, just go do it instead of procrastinating. Like I procrastinated in posting this testimony. So I remember, got the email, I'm sitting on the couch, and my daughter's dad comes home, and I'm sitting on the couch just crying. And I remember this so vividly, and he's like, what happened? I'm like, explained to him the whole thing. And it was just like so humbling, right? And at that moment, I had kind of promised myself, like, if Abba tells me to do something, or he tells me to say something about something, that I'm going to do everything in my effort to make sure I do that thing. And I have been much better at it. Have I been perfect at it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I've been much better at it. So then, of course, we get pregnant later on, and we have a child. Lots happens in life, but I'm not sure that it's relevant to my testimony. I would say the next thing, what's the next thing that's relevant to my testimony? Probably my brother's death. Okay, so a few years later, my youngest brother starts to get involved in like smoking pot. He was 12 years younger than me. Smoking pot and just doing different drugs and stuff. Nothing too heavy at that point. He came to visit me. He was in Alberta, and he came to visit me on Vancouver Island. And this was the second time that I had a vision that someone was going to die. So we were driving, and I was kind of doing the big sister thing. And I was telling him, oh yeah, I didn't tell you guys about that. Did I tell you about it? Okay. I was telling him, I did lots of drugs when I had a phase. And so back in my day, we didn't have fentanyl. Fentanyl wasn't a thing. So a lot of the party lifestyle was like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There was no fentanyl at all. It was not a thing back in my day. Okay. So this is not something that you can do now. You cannot go out and try this and try that nowadays. And I shouldn't have been doing it then, but that's just kind of where life led me for a bit. It was a very short-lived amount of time. It's actually one of the reasons that I found out that I was ADHD, because drugs wouldn't affect me. I could take drugs and everybody else would be all like hyper and stimulated, and I would be calm and wanting to do work. And that clued me in later to the fact that I was ADHD, because when you're ADHD and your brain, it's like you have a lack of dopamine already, and you have a lack of certain things already. So when you add drugs into that, it actually makes you more normal. It makes your brain function more normal than it would with somebody who's already normal, right? And so actually it was one of those things that helped me figure out later on that, because the drugs would never affect me. I would never feel high, or like very rarely feel high or anything like that. And And I was always confused about that. Like, why is everybody else? And I was like, couldn't feel it, right? Anyways, this is also why I didn't want to do the testimony. I didn't really want to share all this information because there's people on this app that just want to talk smack, right? And it's like, you don't really want to give them all your personal dirt, right? And have them talk smack. But we will be obedient because Abba has asked me to do the testimony. So I'm driving later on. I'm driving in the car with my brother, truck. I was driving in my truck with my brother. And I'm talking to him about, it's like, back in the day, yeah, I tried this, I tried that. I did dabble. I said it was very short-lived. And I was being big sister to him. I said, I know you're smoking pot and you're doing this and that. But remember that we have addictive personalities in our family. We have a lot of addiction in our family. And just be really, really, really careful about messing too much with stuff. Like, you know, just keep yourself in check. And, you know, try not to push it too far, right? Being big sister, he was probably about 16 at the time. So as I was saying this to him, I get a vision, and it's like this knowing that just comes into my spirit. It comes into my spirit, and I knew he was going to die, and it was going to be related to drugs. And I knew he was going to die, and it was related to drugs. And I couldn't shake it. It was a knowing. And I prayed for 7 years. I prayed, Abba, don't let him die. Abba, save him. Abba, make sure he knows the Lord. Abba, make sure he knows Yeshua, Jesus at the time, because nobody knew the name Yeshua at that time. You know, in the Bible prophecy where it says, I will make you know my name, he's revealing his names, his proper names during this time because we are at the end. That is why his proper names are being revealed. Okay? During this time, nobody knew his name was Yeshua. Maybe a few select Hebrew scholars, but nobody knew. And we weren't on our phones all the time. We weren't on the internet all the time. That wasn't a thing during this time. So I just knew. I knew he was going to die. And every time I prayed about it, every time I prayed and interceded for him, the answer was still, he's going to die. He's going to go. He's going to go. And so it was 7 years later. 7 years later, I got the call. He had gone into trying all sorts of different drugs, trying all sorts of different things. He ended up going into a psych ward a couple times because the drugs had induced a lot of psychosis onto him. He was doing all sorts of stuff, and it ended up being a drug-induced psychosis. I think I can share this with you. My dad, at one point, was driving him to a drug rehab center in Vancouver. And my brother was tripping out so bad that during the car ride, he was seeing like John Lennon in the car. He was seeing like all these people that were not there. And my dad got him to Vancouver, and they wouldn't admit him because they needed him to go get mental health first. So they needed him to go get the mental health stuff under control first. But the thing was, the drugs and the mental health were working off each other, right? The other thing I think about the drug thing too is I think that it opens doors spiritually to the demonic realm. And I've experienced this with even just pot, with even just edibles. I've experienced with that kind of stuff as well, that I can feel that doors have been opened and the spirit realm has been opened in ways that we shouldn't open it, and that we shouldn't have access to. It opens you up to things that you don't want to have access to, right? So I believe that a lot of these things that happen is like a combination of mental health, depletion of minerals in your body, depletion of nutrition, plus the spirit realm. It's all connected, right? So he goes back, they take him back to Calgary, and he ends up getting admitted into a psych ward in Calgary for a while, and they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. They ended up diagnosing him with schizophrenia. Now, he didn't grow up with schizophrenia. He didn't grow up with any of those sort of problems. I do believe that he was molested, like I was molested, at around 8. That's another part of the story. Around 8, I believe he was molested as well by the same person, who's still alive, but is very old now. And I just want to pray that he repents. And I think he might have, but I pray that he repents. So I do believe that he was molested by the same person. I'm not going to get into the gory details of that, of why I know that. So he had a lot of trauma he was dealing with as well. So the schizophrenia didn't come from, it wasn't natural. He wasn't born with schizophrenia. It came from the trauma plus the drug use plus over time developed into this schizophrenia, right? So he was in there for a while. He got a little bit better, and then he got out, and then he started to get into drugs again. And I think he got into a bit of drug debt. And so my parents had kind of bailed him out time and time again of the drug debts and stuff. And he had gone off to work on the pipeline for a bit, and he made money, and then he would get back into drug debt as soon as he got out and stuff like that. And so in the last month that he was alive, it was the same kind of cycle repeating. And he ended up, okay, this is, how much of this story do you guys need to know? I'll tell you my side of the story. So I was at home in BC. He was in Alberta. I was, that night that I got the call from my dad that he had died, I was playing a guitar that he had given me. My brother had given me. I was playing the guitar, and at that time, I hadn't really played the guitar a lot. It wasn't something I picked up, but for some reason that night I had picked it up and I was playing the guitar that he had given me. And my dad called, and my dad's not one to usually just phone randomly, like especially it was like 9 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. My dad's not that, he doesn't usually do that unless you're making plans. He's not a talk on the phone kind of dad, you know what I'm saying? And he calls, I'm like, okay, that's weird. I knew before I picked up the phone that he was dead, that my brother was dead. I knew he was dead. So I picked up the phone, my dad told me, and I said, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it. And it was in that instant, it was in that moment when I said, I knew this was going to happen, that my heart turned from Yeshua. My heart turned from God. My heart turned from our Creator, and I just forgot Jesus in that moment. I turned from him because I had prayed and prayed and prayed. I didn't understand the things that I understand now, that I prayed that my brother wouldn't have to die. But again, every time I prayed, he said, no, that his time is going to be up. Now, I'm going to try not to cry. My brother, even though he was into drugs and into all sorts of things, this is the stuff that makes me cry. He was the type of kid, like he died at, I think it was 23. He was the type of kid, my mom always used to say this about him. She'd be walking down the street in Calgary and there'd be homeless people. And he would just sit with them. He'd stop whatever he was doing, just sit with them. Hang out with them. Like, when so many people walk by homeless people, or they walk by people that are struggling, and they look at them like they're less or they're unimportant. My brother would always take the time and sit with them and talk with them. And so many people loved him so much. So at his funeral, there's probably 400 people there. 400 people at his funeral. It was packed. The church was packed. There was people standing in the back. Standing room only. It was packed. I had to give the eulogy. That was so hard, giving the eulogy. Oh my gosh. So how did he die? Okay, this is where this story is like incomplete. I don't know. So what happened was he was found hanging in his apartment. Okay. He was found hanging in his apartment by this girl named Dana, and his roommate, who hadn't been home in 3 days. And how do I explain this all? So they found him, we buried him, we had the funeral. After the funeral, one of his friends was a tattoo artist. Now, remember, this is long before I knew what the scriptures said. Also, at this point, I had turned from God. I was mad at God and I had turned from him. So he had a friend who was a tattoo artist, and we were all getting matching tattoos for my brother. So all of his friends have matching tattoos for him, pretty much, like different versions of tattoos for him. So I had gone and got a tattoo for him. And so as I was getting this tattoo done, his friends come up to the house. So it was being done at a house where his friend was staying. It was all sterile and everything, but it was like, she was a friend of his, right? So his friends all come up and they're like, can we talk to you? And I'm like, okay. And I didn't really know his friends at that time. They're just like, okay, you seem like the person that we should tell about this, but we need to tell you something about your brother. And I was like, okay. And this was after we had already cleaned out his place. So we had already gone to his apartment. My dad, my mom, my stepmom, and me went to his apartment and we cleaned out his apartment. In his apartment, there were, sorry, I probably have to watch what I say. There was unaliving stations, okay? So there was a bucket of water with a toaster. There was just different really strange setup things that were very strange, okay? And there was no drug paraphernalia anywhere. There wasn't even a roach, you know what I'm saying? It's like, so it was, as we were cleaning, my stepmom even said, she's like, I saw more drugs at his room when he lived with us than I see. There's no paraphernalia. There's not even a pipe. You know what I mean? There's nothing. There's not even a roach clip. Okay? Those of you guys who have been around that stuff, you understand that, like, if somebody is smoking drugs all the time or they're doing drugs, those objects just exist around the environment, right? So it's very sus. And then there's these stations, these unaliving stations. But just pray over this video that it doesn't get flagged when I say the wrong word. Just protect this video, please. So the whole thing was very sus, very sus. And we cleaned out the house. His landlord actually came. His landlord stopped by, and his landlord was like, I can't believe you guys are cleaning this up. He's like, I never thought you would come clean. We're like, we're not going to leave it. Like, that's not your job to clean up our brother's stuff. So we had packed up all his stuff, journals, whatever, taken everything, and left his roommate's room alone. His roommate hadn't really been home since then. So when they took his body down, they apparently had found a note in his pocket. So they had found this note in his pocket, and that was the note that they thought they had found, okay? At this point, he had been cremated. The apartment had been cleaned. This was a few days later. And so I was getting this tattoo, and his friends come in and they say, we need to talk to you. I'm like, okay. They sit me down and they tell me, they say that they didn't think my brother had himself. They think that he was for the drug debt, okay? And the reason they think that is because the roommate didn't go to the house for 3 days. and then there was very suspicious in the circumstances that he took the girl there to go find him, so that they were discovered together, so that when they went to the apartment, they found him together. Okay. And so the whole thing was very suspicious. And then the phone was missing. My brother's phone was missing, yet it was still being logged into. They could tell that it was still being logged into, but it was missing. And they think that the DRUG dealer had the phone or something like that. So I don't want to get these guys into trouble or anything like that, but they came to me with this information and I was like, well, what can we do, right? And because everything had been cleaned up, there wasn't much we could do. And when I prayed on it, my heart on it was that vengeance is mine, says Yah. So he will repay. If there has been a wrong done, he will repay it, right? So about a month later, I had gotten copies of the note that was found on him, the note that was found in his pockets, right? And some of his friends, including the girl that had found him with the other guy that had gone there and found him, they had wanted to read the note. They wanted to see it. So I took photos of the note, or I had photos of the note. I don't think I ever had the note. I think my mom had it or somebody had it. And we took photos of it and I emailed it and sent it out to the people that have been asking for the note. And the girl messages back to me. She was his kind of girlfriend at the time. And she's like, David didn't write that. I wrote that note. And so they were very artistic people. He would write a lot of music and they were writing songs all the time. And so one of the pages of the note was his writing, and it was something that had been torn out of one of his journals. And then the other page was her writing, and it was something that she had wrote in one of his journals. They had been writing together and doing art, like artistic writing. And these notes did sound like that type of note, but that's not what they were. She's like, we wrote those months ago. We wrote those like 6 months ago before this happened. And so she went to the police and reported this and that it was suspicious. And she told them, several other people, several of the friends went to the police and reported how suspicious it was. But the police didn't seem interested on pursuing it, or there's nothing that they could do because several of the friends went to the police and reported how suspicious it was. But the police didn't seem interested on pursuing it, or there's nothing that they could do because it was gone. So there was nothing that they could really do either way. So at that point, we just left it to the Lord, left it to Yah and said, it's your problem to deal with now. So I gave the eulogy at my brother's funeral, which was very difficult. I don't think there's too much to say about that. So after he died, definitely my heart turned kind of cold towards, and it was shortly after that I started to get into yoga and all sorts of new age stuff. I basically forgot about Yeshua. Basically, it was like Yeshua just left my brain. My heart went cold towards him, and I just went on another path. So I started taking yoga teacher training, started doing all this stuff like that, very new agey stuff, all sorts of tarot cards. And I had played with tarot cards and stuff in the past as well. And my life, as I turned to that stuff, got progressively darker. I went to a few psychics throughout this time, and that every time I went to a psychic, my life got messier and messier and messier. And it was kind of like my life just kept getting messier with all this stuff that I was getting involved in, right? Ended up getting engaged to someone, and we were both very toxic and unhealed when we were engaged. We ended up fighting quite a bit and stuff like that. And he had a lot of trauma that he hadn't worked out. I had a lot of trauma that I hadn't worked out. And so that did not last very long. So that engagement did not last very long at all. And I ended up leaving. And that was when I left that engagement. It was started to be the beginning of my return to Christ. So from my brother's death, I did all this yoga teacher training. I was drinking like crazy. I drank like every single day. Because I was trying to numb the pain, right? So I was numbing the pain, I was looking to try to get healed through the yoga stuff, just doing all this stuff to try to get that healing and that peace again, right? Obviously, none of that stuff worked. It just made things worse and worse and worse. And so eventually I had to leave that relationship that I was in just because it was very toxic, and he was drinking more than I was drinking. I was starting at that point to get a handle on it, but then he was still drinking a lot, and it wasn't going to be healthy if I stayed. He's sober now, so praise Yah. He's sober and he's a great human, and I wish him all the best. But at that time, it was just not going to happen. It was dangerous for me to stay. So I ended up moving to a different town. Life started to slowly work out. But I still had all this new age stuff. This story is about to get interesting, you guys. I had all this new age stuff that I was messing with. I had a psychic approach me on the internet. Be so careful if people approach you on the internet with messages and stuff. Be very careful about that stuff. The psychic approaches me on Facebook or something, and she's like, I feel like I'm supposed to give you a reading for free. I was like, okay. So I take this free reading, and in this free reading, she says all this stuff that leads me down these even worse paths than I was already on. And during this free reading, she tells me, in the next few days, you're going to meet your husband. You're going to meet your man. Now, cut to having a husband, being married, and that has long been an idol for me. It was an idol for me for a long, long time. A very long time. It was an idol. And that's why I never had it properly, because it was an idol. And Abba's not going to give you something. If you're walking with him or he's using you, he's not going to give you something that's an idol to you necessarily, right? Unless he wants to really show you how that thing is not going to save you. But it was definitely an idol to me. And he used that idol in so many ways in my life as well to guide me down the proper path eventually. So I get this message from this psychic, and she's like, you're going to meet somebody in the next couple days that's your man. And I was like, oh, okay. I was so excited because that's what I wanted. I figured if I got the man and all that, life would just start to work out, right? Life would just be good. That's not how it works. I know that now. I was young. I know that now. That's not how life works. But at the time, I was like, yeah, if I just get this, and then it'll be all good, right? He's an idol. It was an idol to me. So a couple days later, I meet this guy. I meet this man. He's an actor. You've probably seen him in a few things. And him I'm going to talk about because I'm not going to tell you who he is. And I don't think he'll ever see this video. And I also wish him all the best. And I've prayed for him and all that. So I definitely wish him all the best. But I'm going to tell you a bit of this story, because it tells you a lot about the spiritual realm and how the spiritual realm works. I go on to this psychic, then a couple days later I meet this guy, and we had this like really interesting connection, and we go on a few dates and stuff like that, and all this stuff transpired in the relationship that, looking back on it, I didn't realize. I was really naive, you guys. I was super naive. I didn't realize he was manipulating me so much. Remember, this guy's an actor. All that he does all day long is act, right? And I never clued in to maybe he would be acting in real life too, until it took me about 8 months to figure it out. 8 months to figure it out. and I didn't know about this stuff until after him. Okay, so he would do this stuff. I think it's called like, what do they call it? Like, it's like they teach men pickup artist stuff. They teach men how to manipulate women, because women women in their purest state are very naive. And that's why men love young women, because they're very naive and they're very sweet. And they like that about young women. But that also means that they're easy to manipulate, right? And I always kind of had this feeling. That everybody thought like me. Everybody had a heart like me. Everybody cared for people like I care for people. And that made me very susceptible to manipulation. Now, this guy definitely saw that in me, and he used it to the max, okay? And so during this process of dating this guy, I believe that he drugged me 2 or 3 times. And I do believe that he drugged me on the first date. Our first date, we went out for breakfast, and I had been feeling sick, okay? I'd been feeling sick, and I wasn't going to go on the date. And I said, you know what? I'm not feeling well, and I'm not feeling up for it. I'm not going to go on this date. And he gave me a vitamin, okay? And he said, oh, this is just a vitamin that's going to make you feel better. And so I took the vitamin, and then we go to the restaurant, and then like an hour later, I start to get so dizzy that I can't even see straight or walk straight, okay? I'm like blacking out, like the walls are closing in on me, okay? I'm blacking out. I'm like, I gotta just sit on a bench. We were walking outside of the restaurant, and I'm like, I just gotta sit on a bench. I don't know where I am. I said, I think I need to go to a doctor. I didn't know what happened to me. And so he then, and this is a pickup artist thing that I found out later, he then got to play the hero and rescue me, right? And so he took me to the hospital. He sat there with me. This is a first date, you guys. He sat there with me. He was attentive to me, all these things, right? We were in the emergency room for quite a while, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. Thought maybe she's diabetic. Nobody clued in that maybe I was drugged or something like that had happened. Anyway, so I was there so long that I kind of had passed out, and then I came to, and it was like they couldn't figure it out. They didn't figure it out. And so I left the hospital like a few hours later, and it had kind of worn off. Whatever was going on had worn off. It was very, very strange. And then he took me to another restaurant to eat, because we were hungry, obviously, because we'd just been through this whole ordeal. And I noticed when we were in the restaurant eating, and I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't think that he was doing it on purpose. But then I found out later that this is also a pickup artist technique. So he was like, if I would take a drink, he would take a drink at the same time. If I would touch my shoulder, he would touch his shoulder at the same time. And he was mirroring all my motions that I was doing. And then I was like, oh, it's so weird that we're like doing the same thing all the time. And then so he noticed that I noticed, and then he stopped doing it. The other thing I caught him doing, and I didn't it didn't clue in at the time. I'm a little slow, you guys. I know you think I'm smart, but I'm a little slow. He kept looking at my ring finger. And I found out later, this is another one of those pickup artist techniques. And then the last one, and he used all of these in the first date. The last thing that he did was, as we were driving in the car, we started sharing like little life stories about our lives and stuff. And I shared something with him about my childhood. And he's like, you'll never believe this. The exact same thing happened to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, the exact same thing happened to me, what you just told me. I was like, really? And so at this point, I'm like, oh, we're soulmates, right? Naive. Yeah, he was really messing with me. But I had no idea. I was naive. I just trusted freely. I don't anymore. Sorry, guys. Sorry, gentlemen. I do not trust freely anymore. So he started, so that was kind of like the beginning of our dating process. So we dated for about 8 months. And there were several other times that I ended up drugged randomly, and he would give me a vitamin or something and I would like end up drugged or whatever. And I didn't catch on. It took me a little bit to catch on that he was really just manipulating me and messing with me. What was one of the things? Yeah, so he would regularly tell me that whatever story I did from my childhood, or if I was, I was like, oh, we went to Disneyland and it was like when I was 16, he's like, what year was that? And he's like, what year was that you were in Disneyland? And so we did the math and we figured out the year that I was in Disneyland. He's like, you'll never believe this. I was in Disneyland at that time too, right? Stuff like that. But he was very, very convincing. Remember, he's an actor. You can turn on Netflix and watch him today if you want, okay? On several shows. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but on several shows. It shows that you've definitely probably watched. You will see his face, okay? So he knows how to act. He was a good actor. He is a good actor, okay? So all the time he would be like, oh yes, that happened to me too. That happened in my childhood, blah, blah, blah. Very, very manipulative, obviously. So how did I figure out that this guy was full of it and just messing with me on purpose? Well, I started to notice just different times that he was like, he would switch from, it was almost like he would switch personalities. So sometimes I would just notice that when he got around people, he would start acting up a little bit more. And he would be like more like showing off. So more narcissistic behavior, more like trying to be seen. And I noticed him like often like checking himself out in car windows and stuff like that. And just really randomly, he would almost change personalities. And I noticed this over a few months. I was like, there's something weird about this guy, right? None of it clued into before, okay? So he at one point shows me this tape that he had made for an acting class that he was taking. And he'd showed me all the audition tapes and the different tapes that he had made for the acting class because he wanted my opinion on it, right? So he had shown me a bunch of this stuff. Months later, we had already broken up, but we decided to go for a debrief dinner or whatever. We go to this restaurant and we're having this debrief dinner. And during this debrief dinner, he starts to act up, like kind of gets more like animated, and it's like that narcissistic spirit flaring up, right? And I noticed too, and I understand this now, that spirit can come and go, and it's like a spirit that comes on people. Just like you can have a spirit of pride just show up suddenly and you get really defensive and prideful. That narcissistic spirit can show up suddenly and you can start acting in a certain way. And so this spirit would actually just show up, right? And I noticed in the restaurant that he started looking at himself in the phone, checking himself out, and then like speaking really loudly so that everyone in the restaurant would put their attention on him. And he started swearing in the restaurant, and there were some old ladies beside us, and I felt so uncomfortable. I felt so uncomfortable because he was being like, the words that he was using were really inappropriate, and there's these older ladies right beside us. I'm like, this is just so... And at that point I was irritated by him. We'd already broken up, right? And I was kind of seeing through a lot of it, not through all of it. I didn't quite see through all of it yet at that point. Anyway, so we're at this table at the restaurant, and he goes into this speech about when his dad died, okay? He goes into this speech, and it's this dramatic speech about the cancer ward, and his dad died of cancer. His dad actually died of cancer. That is true. And he goes like the whole hospice process, and he's talking about these songbirds in the hospice center in a room. And then his dad died, and then he went and saw these songbirds, and it's just like it was a whole speech. It was a whole soliloquy from Shakespeare. It was a whole thing. And he ends this speech about these songbirds and this whole like thing that he was presenting to me. You know, he's not auditioning at this point. We are sitting at a table having dinner. And he starts to cry. And I was looking at him, and like, but something in me was like, I don't believe this. Just sounds like a pile of crap to me. And I just knew that I'm like, something's off about this, right? And he's crying. So I like, do what you do. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must have been really hard. And I look away for an instant. Remember, he's crying. I look back and there's a flash of smug satisfaction that washes over his face. And so he has the tears still there, but smug satisfaction. I caught the smug satisfaction. And I was like, okay. And I didn't clue in till days later, probably 3-4 days later. I was like, I've heard that speech before. Where have I heard that speech that he gave before? And then I remembered there was a songbird speech on one of the acting tapes that he had played for me, one of the acting workshop tapes that he had played for me. And he often forgot the things that he told me because he was lying so much. He had forgotten that he showed me the tape and that I've heard that speech before. And that's when I clued in. I was like, this guy has been manipulating me this whole time. He's just been playing me for a fool, right? So obviously I didn't see him again. I blocked him on everything and never really spoke to him again. I did pray for him. I do pray for him, obviously. Anyways, so that was, I'm even leaving details out, you guys. There's so much I could tell you. I'm leaving so many details out. So it was at that point, that point and realizing what he had done and the way that he had manipulated my feelings and my heart and the way that he had lied to me. I had this realization, especially because the psychic was the thing that set that whole chain of events off. And now during this time, I was seeing angel numbers everywhere. I was seeing all this stuff. I was feeling spirits around all the time. There was a lot of spiritual activity in the air. And I was messing with a lot of new age stuff. Okay. So I was messing with yoga. I was messing with Kundalini stuff. I was messing with all these little meditations. I was taking my Reiki teacher training. So during that time, I was definitely loading up with spirits every single day, different bad spirits every single day. And so it was that realization of coming face to face with what he did, and he had no conscience in how his behavior was affecting me and his behavior was hurting me. And because he had no conscience of that, I just realized, it was like I woke up and I realized there's evil in this world. It's like I came face to face with evil. There's evil in this world and we are not fighting. We're not fighting. We're being passive. We're being passive with it. They are organized and fighting to disrupt us. That psychic approached me to give me that information, to lead me down that path. That psychic was actively working for the kingdom of evil to entrap me, right? There is evil at work and we are not fighting. We are not fighting against it. And for some reason, I find that these witches and warlocks and these people that are working for the evil side, I find that they have a lot more energy than us. They're less worn out. And I think it's too, maybe because they don't have the empathy that we have and the feeling. They're not the feelings that we have. But they are organized and they pray and like they do their cursing and their witchcraft and their false prayers and all of that stuff against us. And they're very, very strategic about it. And they're very organized about it. So that woke me up. And in that instant, when I realized what this man had done and how he had manipulated me so deeply, I remembered Yeshua. So it had been years. It had been years because my heart had grown cold after my brother died. It'd been years. And then I remembered Yeshua. In that instant, I was like, oh yeah, I can get rid of all this spiritual stuff with Yeshua. I can use the blood of Yeshua to get rid of all this stuff. So this, I guess we'll call this part 2. Part 2. So the first part is me just learning a lot of how the spiritual realm works. Part 2 of my journey is coming into Torah observance and coming into my deeper walk. And I would say becoming a priest in a way, becoming like becoming a minister of the gospel. Okay. So for part 2, we'll start with that realization. We'll start with the realization that there is evil in this world. We're not fighting. And the realization that Yeshua is king and he has authority to break off that evil from us. Now, during this time, my neighbor across the street was also coming back to Yeshua, coming back to faith. She was also, at the exact same time, we were being brought together as friends, and she was being brought back into the faith as well. And so we actually ended up starting to connect with that. She was dealing with a lot of PTSD. She was former military, served in Afghanistan. Her whole team pretty much died. I think there was eight members of her, I don't know if they're called teams. What are they called in the army? She was army, and 8 of her fellow service people, men, they're all men. 8 of her fellow servicemen died. And she has some amazing stories about what she's been through as well. But during that time, she was battling PTSD really bad, and I was battling everything that I had gone through. And so we started to look into deliverance. We understood that we are saved, right? But we started to realize that we had all these things working against us and that we needed to take authority and dominion over them so that we could walk free, right? Walk without being held back by these spiritual forces. So we started doing a lot of deliverance prayer, looking a lot into deliverance prayer. I met some friends that gave me some books, and we started to do, I looked that night when I realized how evil that man was. I started looking up renunciation prayers, and I started repenting that night. That very night, I started repenting of all the witchcraft that I've been doing, all the new age stuff that I've been doing, all that stuff that I've been messing with. I started repenting from the occult. Now, the occult spirits that you get from messing with the occult, they are a different breed. They're very strong. The spirits that you can get from fornication and stuff like that are very strong, but the occult ones and some of the Masonic ones are very nasty. They're hard to get rid of sometimes. And you know, when Yeshua says, a lot of people say, well, Christians don't have to be delivered. That has not been my experience. In my experience, most Christians need to be delivered of many things. Pride. Most of them have pride. Christians, believers of every sort have pride, etc., right? But often people have a lot more than that. So I started to do deliverance, self-deliverance, by reading these prayers and praying and looking up YouTube videos and praying, and definitely got some freedom. But what really changed the game for me is another ministry that a friend of a friend, they had a house church, and at the house church, so she had a house church. We started attending their house church, and then they started having this man. His name is Graham Powell. You can look him up, Graham Powell. Come to the house church to talk to us about deliverance and also to minister deliverance over us, okay? And when Graham Powell ministered deliverance, it was not like you see on the TV. It was very peaceful. There's no weird stuff that happens, you know, weird manifestations. I never seen really huge manifestations during his, but I did see people manifest, and like they would start to rub their necks and stuff. Their face would start twitching and stuff, but never any screaming and grunting or anything like that. I don't believe that necessarily that has to happen for deliverance. Sometimes it's just like you can feel things leaving and stuff like that. So he prayed for me that night, and he prayed for my friend that night as well. And that night, nothing really happened. Like I could feel like a lot more freedom. I could feel a lot closer to the Lord, but nothing major happened. But 3 days later, 2 or 3 days later, I had, about 3 a.m., I had a dream. And in this dream, I was fighting this spirit. And in this dream, as I was fighting the spirit, I woke up, but I was still fighting the spirit. And as I'm fighting this spirit, I could feel this thing rise up out of me, and I could see it in my spiritual vision, okay? And I could feel this and see the spirit in my spiritual vision. And as it rose up out of me, I had to pray to get it all the way out. Okay. And it was from the yoga. It was like one of those like many armed idol statue, purple. I think its name, I don't want to say its name, but so it came out of me and I could feel it leave. I felt it leave my body, my flesh, and I saw it go. I saw what it was. I was shown what it was, and I saw it go. And I had several other things over the next few days leave, okay? I felt after this so free. It felt like I was finally myself. And that's what people don't understand about having spiritual bondage, even as a Christian, a believer, is that it's changing the way that you feel about things, that you see about things, all of that stuff. It's changing, it's manipulating your identity. A lot of times it's manipulating your identity, okay? After a few of these things left, and I was loaded. I think I was pretty loaded with them because I'd messed with a lot of occult. I had SA when I was young. I had a lot of stuff, right? I think I had quite a bit of stuff going on. And so this thing leaves and I felt so much better. I was on cloud 9, so happy, like just finally felt free. Finally felt peace in a big way. It was night and day. For the next 3 days, I was just smiling and dancing. And I think we went snowboarding a couple days later, and I was like snowboarding down the hill, just like full of joy and laughing and just praising Yah as I'm snowboarding down this hill, right? Like just so alive. I felt so alive and so amazing for the first time in years, right? Now, this whole deliverance process was an ongoing process. It was, I would say, about a 3-year process of just consistently being delivered. Now, if you look back even on my videos, which I hate to tell you to do this because it's embarrassing for me, but for the sake of transparency, just scroll back on my videos and go to the early videos and look at my eyes and look at like how less settled I am, how much less peace I have. If you go back, how much less secure I am, how much less able to speak I am. If you look through those videos, the older videos, you'll see the difference from then until now. Yes, part of that is practice, speaking to people on the internet and being comfortable. But some of that was spiritual warfare. Some of that was still spirits that were messing with me, right? Spirits of anxiety and insecurity and all of those things, rejection, all those things. As time has progressed and I've been aware of these things and I've known how to fight these battles, I've been able to get freer and freer. And that's one thing I do notice is that I just get more and more at peace and more free. And that's something that every one of you can also have, right? If you're struggling with these things and you feel burdened and you feel heavy, sometimes people meet Yeshua and they get baptized and it happens quite a bit all at once. Sometimes you have to work through it a little bit. You have to get a new understanding because you can't renounce and rebuke something you don't understand yet, right? Like if you don't understand something is a sin or you don't understand where your thinking is wrong, you can't renounce and come out of agreement with your wrong thinking if you don't even know that you're thinking wrong yet, right? Which is why my journey was really long, I think, as well, because I had to kind of learn all these things on my own through trial and error. And it's also why I have a discipleship training program now, because I want to help people go through this quicker so that they don't have to do the process in as many years as me. Because if you have really good help, you can do it a lot faster, right? You can go through the process a lot faster. And a lot of people say the internet is evil, but I think it's a blessing. And Abba uses all things for good because the internet allows us to share this information quite easily. So when I was saved, I had no access to this information, right? I had no access to discipleship, but because we have the internet now, we all have a lot more access to these things, okay? So if you do want to get discipleship through me, I do have a program. I'm not here to sell you a program or anything like that. It's by donation. If you can't afford any donation, just message me and I'll give you a login. It's also, it's not for that purpose. It's because I want you to have a structured place where you can learn and grow, and get structured information that will actually help you. Okay, so you don't have to go through the process as long as I went through the process, right? No, I'm not trying to sell you a course. I'm just telling you that it's available. So what is my point? I went through the deliverance, and my friend and I ended up going through quite a bit of deliverance together. We learned a lot along the way. I want to go back to that crystal. So if some of you are still here from the beginning of this message, so remember that crystal that I had that my partner had brought home? It had ended up in our house, but eventually my partner, my daughter's dad, had gone and thrown that thing away because there was something attached to that thing. That this was years and years before this, right? Okay, so he took that crystal, that quartz crystal, and then took it to a river and threw it in the river and got rid of it forever. Okay, now this new church, the house church that we've become a part of, the leaders of the house church decided that they were going to buy a piece of land, and the piece of land just happened to be near that beach. This is 15 years later, 10 years later, near that beach where my partner at the time had found that crystal that we had eventually gotten rid of. And they had so much spiritual warfare around trying to purchase this property in that area. It was like so much spiritual warfare against it. And so they knew that we had lived there, so they reached out to me and to talk about this property. And I said, oh yeah, I had so many encounters in that area. I saw physical entities in that area in my house. I don't think I told you too much about that time that I lived in that area, but during that time when I lived in that area, I was really messing with the New Age as well. It was before I'd really come to Christ in a full way. And I was really dabbling. I was trying to figure out, well, what's this God stuff all about? Like, I want to know God. I want to know who my creator is. I was trying to figure it out. So I was listening to a lot of different, all over the place stuff. And it was during that time that I was messing with so much stuff and meditating a lot. And I saw a physical entity in my house. And it came in the form of my great-grandpa. It looked like my great-grandpa, but it wasn't him. It looked like him, but it wasn't him. And at the time, I wasn't worried about it. I thought it was real. Like, I thought it was really him coming to visit me, right? I know better now. And then during that time, too, my great-grandma died, and I went to her funeral. And I was really messing with this stuff. But I was, like, still calling myself a Christian, but I was kind of messing with, like, New Age Christianity stuff. And at her funeral, I had gotten there late because I had traveled there from out of town. And so I had missed the open casket part. So I was able to go into the area, the viewing area, alone. So it was just me in there with her body. And the guy, the undertaker, had opened up the casket. And I was able to say goodbye to her body. She was already gone. Alone. And again, this is the time I was messing with a lot of meditations and stuff. And I turned around and she was physically sitting in the pew. Physically sitting there. I could see her 100% sitting there. And then she disappeared. It was so surreal. I don't even know. Like, it was so surreal. And so I don't think it was her. I think it was an entity pretending to be her. But because I had been messing with all this stuff, it had brought all these spirits into my life, okay? And so I was living at that location where this crystal was found during that time, where these new pastors are now buying that house in the same neighborhood, okay? So the pastors come to me and they're like, what do you know about this neighborhood? I said, well, that neighborhood, I was starting to see things. There was demonic entities all the time. One time I was trying to astral travel and I was doing this astral travel meditation, and thankfully there was a Bible by my bed. and I started to do this astral travel meditation, I was just playing with stuff. I was just messing with stuff that I had no business messing with. And I could, as I was trying to do this meditation, I could feel this spirit come into my room, and it was the darkest, most evil spirit. The thing had to be like 10 feet tall, 11 feet tall. And I could feel it was the most evil, the most dark spirit I'd ever felt. And instantly I was like, whatever I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing it. And I grabbed the Bible that was beside my bed next to all my New Age books that I was looking at, and I was just all over the place. And I grabbed the Bible and I held it. I put the covers over my head because that's going to save you, right? And then I started praying the Our Father prayer because I remembered the Our Father prayer from when I grew up in Catholic church. And so I started praying the Our Father prayer over and over and over and over again until the thing left. And eventually the thing left. And I never messed with that stuff again. I never messed with astral travel again. Do not mess with trying to leave your body, you guys. Don't ever do that. So bad. So bad. That spirit was so evil. And when I thought about it after, I'm like, that spirit was going to jump in my body. If I was able to astral travel out of my body in some kind of New Age kooky way, that spirit wanted to get into my body and inhabit my body. So do not mess with that stuff. No bueno. Okay, so at this location, these pastors, I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of side trips here, guys. These pastors are trying to buy this house. We start praying about it, and they start asking me questions about the area. I'm like, yeah, that area is like overrun with spirits. Overrun. It's so much spiritual activity there. It's crazy. And they're like, I wonder why. And they're still trying to buy this house. And we pray about it, and then they get their mom praying about it. We're all praying on it, and their mom sees this vision of these witches on a beach doing a ceremony. And she can see these witches in a circle doing a ceremony on the beach right there. Well, that beach is the beach where my partner had found that crystal, right? So now we've connected the dots. Okay, they were doing witchcraft in that area. They opened up some kind of portal. There's some kind of portal in that area, right? And so I reach out to who was my partner at the time. I reached out to my ex, and I asked him, like, do you remember this crystal? Do you remember? He's like, yeah, that crystal that there was something attached to it. It was just crazy. And yeah, I'm like, yeah, that crystal. I'm like, what did you do with that crystal? And he's like, oh, I threw it in the river. I got rid of that thing. That thing was cursed. I'm like, yeah, okay. And so I'm telling them about this crystal, and he's like, and the man who found the crystal, he says, yeah, I went and talked to, because in that area there was known warlocks and known witches that we knew. That it was just like a small community, right? Everybody knows everybody. And he's like, yeah, I went and talked to the people, the head warlock guy of the area, because I was doing a job for him on his property. And I was doing some maintenance for him on his property. And I asked him, he's like, do you know anything about Flea Beach? Like, what's up with Flea Beach? And the guy says, oh yeah, we do rituals down there all the time. That's like our spot to do rituals. And so that was the other confirmation. We had the actual warlock guy tell him that they did the rituals down there all the time. And so I told my pastor and his wife that, and they're like, oh, okay, this is why we're getting so much pushback. Like, they couldn't get the financing to buy the property. Nothing was working to buy this property, but they really wanted to buy this property. And even when they went out to the property later to just weed whack and stuff, they would have people showing up and screaming at them for no reason. They would just randomly, people would show up and scream at them because just the demons did not want them there. The spiritual entities did not want them there. And while they were going through this, I prayed with them, and we all prayed for the financing to come through and for them to get this property, because we felt like they were really supposed to be placed out there. Because these two ministers were very powerful spiritual warfare ministers. They knew how to do spiritual warfare. They knew how to clean up an area, right? And that is a skill that you kind of have to learn over time, like how to clean up an area spiritually, right? And so they get this property, and they did end up, after we prayed together, they ended up getting the property. And they got the financing and got out there. And then there was still warfare when they were out there. But I had a vision while I was praying about this with them that they would end up having little church meetings in the hall there, the little town hall. And I just spoke to her last week again, and she said that indeed they ended up having spiritual, like little prayer meetings in the hall and Bible study meetings in the hall there. And that's been established now for a while. So it did all work out. They did get the property, and that property actually really blessed them in many ways. They are trying to sell it now because they're too old to maintain it now. So they had to simplify and downsize because obviously a property like that was a lot of work. It was kind of like an acreage or whatever. So what else happened? Told you guys about that. During that time, we were doing a lot of spiritual warfare. We were learning how to do spiritual warfare. We were doing a lot of deliverance prayer. And it was around that time, I did go through this period of kind of questioning my faith. And I was unsure. I was like, because I had been led off on all these different paths with the New Age and whatever, I had started to question, like, is Yeshua the only way? Why is Yeshua the only way? Why can't we do this and do that? Why is it only Yeshua? And I started to have questions and started to waver. And one day I went to church, and I would say that this was kind of the beginning of my journey into the whole truth. You know, I kind of had half the truth at that point. I had the Yeshua is our salvation part of the truth. But I would say that this was the moment that I started journeying into the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? And so I go to the Pentecostal church that we were going to, and they had a prayer call, and everyone was going to pray for each other and just request prayer from each other. And again, I was very timid in my faith still, so I wasn't really able to pray over other people yet. I just wasn't secure in that way yet. But this lady was standing beside me during this prayer call, and she said, is there anything you want prayer for? And I said, you know what? I need prayer for my faith because my faith is weak. I need to see that this is true and that everything in the Bible is true, and that I can really stand on this, right? And so she prayed for me, and I'm half deaf, by the way. I'm deaf in this ear, and she was praying in this ear. So I didn't really hear what she was saying exactly, but she did pray over me for about half an hour. And then it was that week that I started to come across all of this information about the validity of the Gospels and the validity of the Gospels and the Gospel accounts and everything that happened. And I started to learn about how there's non-biblical sources, there's Jewish sources, there's Roman sources outside of the Gospels, outside of the scriptures that actually give more validity because they're accounts that aren't within the scripture, right? And then I also started to come across this information about the dating and the timing of the gospel and how that all worked out. And if you're ever curious about this type of stuff, you want to look at Cold Case Christianity. He's a man that does a podcast, and he does all sorts of YouTubes and stuff about this. And he goes, because he was a cold case detective agent, he goes through, like, how do you tell if an eyewitness statement is true or false? What details do you look for? What red flags can you find if something is not true, right? He goes through all the different things because he worked with cold case files for so long, he's really able to articulate key things that you wouldn't think about as a normal person that you need to watch for when listening to somebody's testimony, like what kind of words that they use and why do they use certain words. And he has really good, interesting information on this. And he actually started off his journey as a non-believer wanting to disprove the Gospels, wanting to not make a case for them. And then when he went out to prove that they were false, he did so much research and so much digging, and because of his background, he was able to do that research in a very good way. He actually became a believer because he's like, 100%, this is true. This is not fabricated. This is not a conspiracy. This would not have held up this long if it was a conspiracy, etc., etc. So Cold Case Christianity, if you want to look him up, he is excellent. So anyways, I was led to him, and I started to dig through some of his information. And another thing that had happened to really solidify the importance of the scriptures to me was my daughter came home from school. We lived in an area that's surrounded by a native reservation. So we have like a whole tribe of natives that lived in our town and lived near our town, right? And she came home from school one day and she's like, oh, the native chief elder came to our school and spoke to us today. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. This was around this exact same time. And I was like, what did he tell you about? And she was like 6 at this time, 7 years old at this time. She proceeded to tell me about the native legend that he told them, that there was a native legend that had been passed down generation to generation from even before the white people had come to North America. Their tribe had this legend about a boat that landed on a mountaintop, and birds were sent out, and there was a great flood. And she proceeded to tell me the story of Noah's Ark. But she didn't know the story of Noah's Ark. She knew the story of the chief elder in the tribe where our area was. And this was a legend, a story that had been passed down through their tribe since before the white man was on this land, right? So that was like, I was like, whoa, ding, 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 something's up with this. And so I started to research flood stories in native cultures and all this stuff. And I came up with, obviously, that there has been flood stories and these are reliable. And I was like, okay, so why are they teaching our children all this stuff in school and they're not teaching them that there was an actual flood? There was an actual worldwide flood, and there are tribes around the world that have accountings for an actual worldwide flood. Why? Why can't you say Jesus in school? Why can't you talk about Jesus in school? He is a viable, accredited, the historical figure where we have the most documentation on in all of society worldwide is Yeshua. But we are not allowed to talk about him in school, right? Especially in Canada, right? But yet they're learning about Greek gods. They're learning about all this other crap, right? But they can't even talk about Yeshua in school. It didn't make sense. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, if this stuff is true, if these things are true, why are we being taught the opposite in school? Okay. So that obviously woke me up to a whole bunch of other things about the school system, etc., etc. But from there, I started to really dig into, this is annoying me. I started to really dig into historical evidence of the Bible, historical evidence of the scriptures. So I started to look up just different things. And of course, I came across Ron Wyatt's work, and I came across all these things about different historical evidences of the scriptures. And I ended up somehow on a Ron Wyatt YouTube video. It was the one where he talks about finding the Ark of the Covenant and where the Ark of the Covenant is and how he found blood on the Ark of the Covenant and he took that blood to be tested. And I watched that video randomly on YouTube and it touched me so deeply. And I realized, wait a second, because in my Christian walk till this point, I had been very mainstream. You know, we don't worry about the Old Testament. We just focus on the New Testament. And I'm like, wait a second. Yeshua's blood went on the Ark of the Covenant. So if Yeshua's blood went on the Ark of the Covenant, then these things matter. They're very meticulous and particular, and it's very important to understand the design and all these little details, right? And so then I went into full nerd, ADHD nerd mode, autistic mode, and I started researching every little thing about the Ark and the Ark of the Covenant and Mount Sinai and all. I went deep, right? I went down the rabbit hole, and I started to see all the different important features of the stories in the Old Testament, of the accounts in the Old Testament, right? I started to learn this stuff. Still, during this time, even though I'm learning all this stuff and I'm coming into a deeper faith, I'm still struggling. I still have a lot of idolatry. I'm still made getting married an idol. Getting married was still an idol to me in a huge way. Still struggling in a lot of ways, okay? But I'm getting deliverance. I'm getting smarter. I'm getting better. I'm getting more wisdom as I walk this out. Well, I had a very deep sense of loneliness, and because I really wanted to be married, right? And so this sense of loneliness, I would often find myself like crying out to him, right? Crying out to Abba and just asking him to, what do I need to do to, be able to live? I was also incredibly broke at the time. I was incredibly poor. We were very poor. I won't get into all the details because I don't want to slander anyone else, but we were very, very poor. Like as poor as you can get. That's how poor we were. Well, no, I won't say that, because we weren't homeless. We had a home. We had the basics, but we really struggled to make ends meet. That friend I was telling you about, I'll tell you that story later. So just keep that in mind. We were pretty poor. And I was a single mom, struggling to get by. Didn't have like 2 nickels to rub together most weeks. Trying to work with a small child. Very difficult. Very, very difficult. Those were really hard times. And so I was crying out to Yah, and I was like, Yah, teach me how to live. Whatever you want me to do, just teach me how to live. I don't know how to live like this. I don't know how to live. And I was snotty, crying, and, just crying out to him. And he, within 2 days, so I was completely broken at his feet, submitted. However you want me to live, I will live like this. I submit to you. Just teach me how to live. I don't understand how to live. That was my prayer. Within 2 days, he started showing me the Sabbath day. Keep in mind, I was going to Sunday church at this time. I thought I was doing all the things. I was going to Sunday church. I was doing the Sunday thing. And he started to show me, remember the Sabbath day. And it clicked to me. I'm like, remember the Sabbath. Why do we all forget the Sabbath? Why does the entire church forget the Sabbath, right? And so that weekend, I kept the Sabbath for the first time. That weekend, I went down, and I had a little retail store at the time, like a little shop where I made clothes and stuff. And I changed the hours on the door, and I kept the Sabbath for the first time. So I was already dead broke, poor, totally poor, and struggling to keep everything just going. And that day of the week, Sabbath day of the week, was the busiest day that I had all week. So instantly I was giving up. Like, I knew it was going to be $500-$600 that would have come into the shop that day, right? Because it was the busiest day of the week. And so, and you guys are probably like, well, you were making lots of money at $500 or $600 a week. When you own a business, you have to pay the rent to be there. You have to pay the bills to be there. It doesn't add up very fast when you own a business. There's a lot of expenses, right? So that was the main day that would cover a lot of my bills, right? And so I put the note on the shop door, closed for the Sabbath. And that Friday night, I had changed the hours, and I locked the door, and I was not going back. And that was the first time I kept the Sabbath day holy, set apart. And that day, everything in Scripture, that morning, that Sabbath morning, everything in Scripture opened up for me. And I understood and saw connections and saw things that I had never seen before. It was like I could read stuff that I had been reading for years that never made sense, and it finally made sense, and it finally clicked. And it was that obedience piece. Once I put the piece of the puzzle of be obedient to his commandments, once I understood that piece of the puzzle, Just do the commandments too. Belief in Yeshua, commands of God, right? Revelation 14:12. Once I understood that, the Bible finally started to make sense. Because now the back wasn't always contradicting the front. Now everything wasn't always contradicting everywhere. And the Bible finally made sense. And I could see connections and things that I never saw before, right? And it was like it was spiritual. It was like a veil lifted off of me, and I could see things that I'd never seen before. Okay? And so for the next 3-4 years, I studied a lot. Now, from that point of starting to keep the Sabbath, right after that, I had a little test. So I'll tell you about the little test that I had. Again, remember that getting married was an idol for me, okay? So at some point I had prayed, just after I'd started keeping the Sabbath, I had prayed for Abba to give me discernment of spirits so that I would understand if I was hearing from a spirit from him or from a different kind of spirit, right? And so I had prayed for discernment of spirits. And he had told me before to get off of Christian Mingle. I was on Christian Mingle, and he's like, just get off of that for now. Don't be on Christian Mingle. I was like, okay. So I never had many bites on Christian Mingle anyways, because single mom, whatever, obviously, Christian Mingle is more for the young people that don't have children and stuff. But anyways, I got off Christian Mingle and was obedient to hearing him. And then after I had prayed this prayer, I started keeping the Sabbath. And then after I prayed this prayer for discernment of spirits, I heard a voice tell me to get back on Christian Mingle. And I was like, okay. And so I got back on Christian Mingle. And thinking that was Abba telling me to get back on Christian Mingle. But the voice, okay, so now I know the discernment. And this was me learning the discernment of hearing from different spirits. And this is a prayer that I do recommend that you ask him to teach you the discernment of spirits, because sometimes people are hearing from false spirits all the time and they don't know it, because they don't know his words. So they can't check whether they're hearing from a false spirit. And also they're not prayerful about what they're hearing, right? And checking it. So a lot of times people are hearing from false spirits a lot. To be honest, I see it a lot on TikTok. So I get back on Christian Mingle, and I meet somebody right away from Alaska. And this gentleman reaches out to me. He's a regular Christian, and he reaches out to me, and he's like, I just found your profile. I found you so interesting, yada, yada. And so we start talking. And he's a very regular Christian. And we ended up meeting right away. He came down to visit me. We ended up meeting right away. It went fine. It went okay. He was nice. He was who he said he was. I was who I said I was. And we decided to continue talking and dating. Well, as he found out that I was so at this time I was starting to become obedient into the commands of Yah. So I was removing pork. I was keeping the Sabbath days. I was learning about the feast days, and I was going to start keeping the feast days. So I was starting to learn about all this stuff, right? And he really didn't like that. He was a very mainstream Christian. And he would say rude things about it. And it was kind of a red flag, but at that time I didn't quite see, I didn't quite understand that it was a red flag. And so during this time, we kind of butt heads on that. And I ended up going to Alaska twice. So I went up to Alaska twice to see him. The first time went really, really well. It was amazing little time. Very short, like a weekend trip. And it was a really good trip. And then the second time, it was more serious. It was in the summer, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go for 10 days. I'm going to really know who this guy is, and like really know if this is what we're supposed to be doing if I go for 10 days. So went up to Alaska. Everything was kosher. Like we just hung out, and we had food. He went to work every day. It was fine. It was okay until the end of the trip. Okay, so he did bring up to me several times. He's like, how am I supposed to lead you if you know so much about the Bible? And that is kind of an ongoing problem that I tend to have, is like, I do know, if you guys who know me and have been around my videos for a while or have done the studies with me, it's like, yeah, I do know the Bible pretty well. So it is hard to find a man who could, be a leader in that way. But I don't necessarily know that Abba needs that type of thing. But that's a whole nother conversation. Like, I don't think that, like, a man could lead me in other ways, right? I have lots to learn in many ways. And a man who knows the New Testament more than I know the New Testament could definitely lead me in a lot of ways, right? So it's not that I'm prideful and I don't think I can be led. It's just in this situation, he's like, the Bible, but you disagree with me on a lot of things. And I'm like, yeah, we don't agree on quite a few things. And he's like, how am I supposed to lead you if you don't agree scripturally with me? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to change what I'm seeing. Like, if the Spirit is showing me X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to waver on that and just change that for you, right? I'm not going to lie and say, I don't see this in the Spirit, because that's just what I'm seeing, right? Anyways, so at that point, things started to kind of get a little bit sticky with us. Like, we didn't get along very well. And I still had like 3 or 4 more days there. And so it got a little awkward. Then near the end of the trip, I'm going to a barbecue with him. We're going to his friend's house for a barbecue. And of course, they're Americans. They want to eat some pork ribs and stuff. They're regular Americans. They want to eat pork ribs at the barbecue. And I don't eat pork. We get to the barbecue. He did graciously, we went out and bought steaks to bring to the barbecue so that we could have steak. But then they ended up putting like bacon bits in the potatoes. So I couldn't even have potatoes. All I could have was steak. And at this point, my nerves were fried. I was like, I got to get out of here. I just want to go home. But my flight wasn't for a couple more days, right? And I'm at this barbecue and his friend asked me, well, why don't you eat pork? And before I could even give an answer, and I was just going to say, well, Yeshua didn't eat pork, so I don't eat pork. That's all I was going to say. And before I could even answer, this guy that I was dating pipes up. He's like, she's a Muslim. That's why she doesn't eat pork. Like, very rude. He knew, like, he knew what was up, right? And he was so rude, right? And at that point, I knew. I was like, there's no redeeming this. This relationship is not getting redeemed, right? And so I pieced out, like, I finished up the trip, obviously, because I had to get to the airport, and, like, we were polite to each other, but we both knew that this was, like, not going to happen. It was not going to be a thing that worked, right? But this test was 2 things for me. Going through this test with him was 2 things for me. It was teaching me the discernment of spirits to make sure that I'm hearing Yah's voice versus hearing a different voice, and to test the spirits. Because if I was to test the spirit of that whole thing, well, this person is not keeping the commandments of God. He's unequally yoked in that regard, right? And so there was like the voice that I heard, but then there's also the testing of the spirit of learning that if someone's not keeping the commands of God, or they're speaking against keeping the commands of God, then that's also a process of testing the spirit, right? So he was teaching me through these life lessons how to discern these things, right? And I was learning. I'm a slow learner, apparently. I'm a really slow learner. So anyways, that also solidified to me, because I was still kind of wavering. Do we keep Torah? Don't we keep Torah? I was still wavering on the understanding of the theology, because I didn't know the theology like I know now. I didn't know the Bible like I know now back then. I was just figuring this stuff out. I was just new to figuring this out. And so what that exchange also taught me is that I was willing and wanted to follow Abba no matter what. And I wouldn't just be able to ever lay that down just for something that I wanted in this life, right? that I was willing to follow him. I wanted to follow him no matter what. And I wasn't going to lie. I wasn't going to live in a lie. I wanted the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, right? So after that is when I really, this was in August of, I want to say 2018, 2017, something like that. I think probably 2017. I know a lot of people came to Torah observance in 2017. It was like the Spirit was moving and showing a lot of people these things in 2017. So it was that year, 2017 or 2018, I can't recall like specifically, in August, I had reached out to some people on 119 Ministries Fellowship Finder, and they were local to our area, and I asked if I could meet up with them. I said, I've just discovered that we should be keeping the commandments of God, and that I want to meet some people that also know this, and they were on the Fellowship Finder. So I met up with them and started to get to know them. And so right after I got back from Alaska, I went to dinner at their house, and it was such a lovely experience. They were such lovely people, and they made us a lovely meal. It was my daughter's birthday the next day. He baked her a cake. They baked my daughter a cake, and they were just the sweetest people, right? And so in that process of going through what I went through in Alaska and then coming into this, and these people were so lovely and sweet, I knew, I was like, we're keeping Torah. We're keeping the commandments. And so it was my daughter's 13th birthday, I think. It was her 12th or 13th birthday, and the next day. So the very next day, it was her birthday. And I had a birthday party planned. And so after we had this nice dinner, we went home, slept, and then we had this birthday party in the park with her friends and some of the family members. Well, her grandma from her dad's side shows up at the park for her birthday. Lovely, wonderful. And she says to me, okay, so remember, we had just decided the night before, we're keeping the commandments of God. We're keeping our faith in Yeshua. We're going to keep the commandments. We're keeping Sabbaths. We're going to eat no pork. We're going to walk this walk, okay? Her grandma comes up to me and says, oh, we got our DNA done yesterday, or we just got our DNA results back last week. And I was like, oh, interesting. And she's like, yeah, Marco, her grandpa, is 99% Jewish. And I was like, what? Like, yeah, well, we knew he was up there like, we knew he was Jewish, but we didn't know to what extent. Because his parents had come over from during the war, blah, blah, blah. And his last name is Isaac and the whole thing. So we knew there was that lineage there, but we didn't know to what extent. But he came back like 99.9% or whatever. And I was like, and this is her like bar mitzvah birthday, right? And I'm like, and we just decided to keep Torah, right? So it was a lot lining up. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And don't forget, from the beginning of my testimony, I had already known since I was 13, same timeline, 13 or 12, that I needed to be up on Middle East politics for some reason. I felt like I really needed to understand Middle East conflict for some reason since I was 13, right? And then now on her 13th birthday, we're finding out that she's like whatever percentage Jewish, right? So with my daughter, and also a really interesting thing. So me and her dad were very lukewarm when we were together. Very lukewarm. We were believers, but we were confused. We were very confused believers. We did not know how to do life at all. And when she was born, however, I couldn't figure out what to name her. So we didn't name her for 8 days. And it wasn't because we understood that you don't name a Jewish baby for 8 days. We didn't know anything about any of this. We were like blind to all of this. But when she was born, for some reason, I couldn't decide on a name for her. We couldn't agree on a name. And I was going through name books, and I was sitting there for like 8 days. And finally, we figured it out. On the 8th day, we figured out what we were going to name her. And so if you don't know, Jewish babies aren't named until the 8th day, usually. They wait till the 8th day to name them. And so on the 8th day, we figured out her name. And I actually named her, her middle name is Chai, which is this. It's like, I don't know if you can see it. Like that, can you see it? Her middle name is Chaya, which is, I might be butchering that pronunciation. We called her Chaya forever because we didn't know. I just thought it was pretty. When I was looking through the name book, it said Chaya, Chaya, and then it said it means life. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I'm going to name her that. And so that's her middle name. Her middle name is this symbol, which is like the breath of life from Yah, right? It's a yod and a hey. And so I named her this Jewish middle name that means the breath of life from Yah, not knowing that 13 years later, we would find out all of this stuff. We'd be walking in Torah. We'd be doing all this stuff. And so it was just so many pieces, miraculous pieces put together, right? So epic how he writes. It's like he writes your story for you. Where were we with the actual testimony though? Okay, so I was talking about keeping the Sabbath and how, so I had started to keep all the commandments. I'd found out on her birthday of her Jewish lineage, etc., etc. And then, so we started to walk in the commandments and we started to just learn them. And so every Sabbath for 4 years, me and 4 other friends did exactly what we are doing now on my channel, is we sit down and we go through the Torah portion line by line and we look stuff up and we look at maps and we talk about different things and we look up words. And we did that for 3 years straight with them. And then I did it for 1 year on my own. Okay. Now, if you know the parable of the fruit trees and you know the command of the fruit trees is, if you are a newly planted fruit tree, a newly acquired fruit tree, and people are like fruit trees, right? We grow good fruit or bad fruit. You know a tree by its fruit. In Leviticus 17, I believe it is, it talks about how if you go into a new city and you acquire it and there's fruit trees, you do not eat of that fruit tree for the first 3 years. So for 3 years, that fruit of the fruit tree is just to be thrown away. It's not good fruit yet. And in the 4th year, it's offered directly up to Yah. And then in the 5th year, you can start to consume the fruit. So from the time that I started to keep Torah, I didn't plan this. I didn't know about this. This was something that Abba showed me later. I did 3 years of study with this group. There was 4 of us, and then we would sit down every Sabbath and we would just go through line by line the Torah portion. We would look up words in Hebrew. We would do all the things. Almost exactly what I do with you guys on Sabbath now. And that's what Abba, he showed me that process. And then now I'm showing you guys that process, right? And we did that for 3 years straight. And then I kind of moved away from that group a bit because they were struggling. They were not keeping Yeshua. They were starting to throw out Yeshua. So at that point, I kind of backed away from that group, unfortunately. Abba did give me dreams ahead of time that this was going to happen, that they were going to start to go off in another direction, which happens a lot. And this is a weeding out process. There's a weeding out and there's a sifting process every step of the way. There's sifting processes in Christianity. There's sifting processes in Torah observance. There's sifting processes everywhere. He's sifting everyone to figure out who's going to stick with him and seek him on all things, right? It's part of what he has to do to know. And so that we know our own hearts, and so that he knows what we're going to do, I guess. But anyway, so they started to kind of reject Paul, and they started to reject, some of the New Testament. So I just kind of quietly backed out of that group and started to move on to other things. But it was interesting because I got warning dreams 6-7 months ahead of that starting to unfold, right? Abba started to warn me, okay, these guys are gonna, there's a problem in the camp kind of thing, right? And so at that point, I stepped away from the group and started to study on my own. So I studied on my own and practiced the feasts on my own, practiced the feasts at my own house, had other people join me at my house and practiced the feasts. Now, during this time, COVID starts to ramp up and all that stuff. And then the whole COVID thing happens, right? But I had been, from the time that I started keeping Sabbath to now, like I make stable income now, to the point where I know that Abba's got me and I don't have to, it's not like before where I was like really stressed all the time, right? And then, I don't have the loneliness, I have the peace. So from that time he told me and start walking in my commandments, as I've walked in his commandments and learned his commandments and walked them out of my life has started to sort out in so many ways, right? Like the commandments help you to put your house in order. The commandments are to keep your house in order. So if your house is chronically out of order and your house is chronically a mess, you want to look for the spiritual warfare aspect, but you also want to look to where you're being disobedient to the commandments, because there's likely something there, like some rebellion in that area or something that pride in that area where you haven't looked at it, right? So as COVID starts to happen, that's when he starts to call me into ministry. So it was 2020 that I posted on TikTok one video, and it went super viral overnight. I woke up to like 100,000 notifications or something crazy, and 10,000 followers in one night. And it was not something, I was not looking to go start a ministry. I was not looking to go be public. I was just sharing on TikTok. Okay. And within a night, it was too much for me. Like, I was like, what do I do with 10,000 people? It was too much at once. Right. And so I had to go through a bit of a process of learning how to deal with people and learning how to not take offense to every comment and not take every comment personally, and stuff like that. You get a lot of weird comments when you have a video that goes super viral. And I've had a few of them go super viral now, to the point where it's like you get really strange comments. People call you all sorts of names, etc. And so that's kind of when the ministry began. But so another thing about how the ministry part of this began is, you remember that lady that I told you about, the pastor that had the house church, and her husband had the house church? One time during prayer, she had prayed over me, and the Holy Spirit came upon her, and she started speaking and anointing me for ministry. So she spoke, and she proclaimed that I was going to be in ministry and that I was going to do these. And at that time, when this happened, I was very weak. I was a very weak believer. And at that time when this happened, I was like, what are you talking about? So Abba always proclaims something before he does it. So if he's going to bring you into ministry, he will make sure that there's some sort of thing that he's proclaiming it ahead of time, and then it'll happen later. I have also had this experience where I've been called to pray over other people and speak to them that they're going to be in ministry and that they need to move ahead with their ministry and go ahead and do it. So it's like that process of, it's almost like you're anointing them, or you're proclaiming the prophecy that they're going to go forth into ministry. And I've seen this happen several times. It is a thing. So she proclaimed that to me, and I was still very not in a good place when I was like, okay, sure, I'm going to be a minister. I didn't think at the time that I'd be where I am today, right? So then the ministry starts to kick off, and I guess you guys, most of you know the rest. Some of you have been with me for a while, and the ministry just kept growing on here. and he's kind of taken me through different phases of it. And right now, so a big part of what he's shown me in ministry as a minister of the gospel is one thing that it's like, if you are going to wield the keys to the kingdom and be able to bind and loose and be able to deliver people, help people find the deliverance, like administer deliverance to people, right? It's not that I do it, but he uses me to minister to people, is that you will be called to a higher standard of living. You will be called to consecrate yourself to a higher level. So, there's salvation, base level salvation. Like, I'm saved and I can just, live and, sort of live a clean life. There's that. Yes, that's a thing. But as you grow closer and he uses you for more things, you have to be more careful. He's even shown me that I have to be really careful that I don't curse people in my mind, and I don't curse people mentally, or like if I see somebody and I have like, any kind of thought about them, that I have to rebuke that and bless them and make sure that I'm praying over people and blessing them at all times and stuff like that. Whereas like a regular Christian who's not kind of wanting to minister in that way might not do that. They might be okay, or maybe they will in the future. I don't know. It just depends on the process and part of the walk that they're on. But they might be okay having certain thoughts, or, being a certain way, thinking a certain way. That's not maybe outwardly sinful. But for what he's shown me is that we do have to really guard ourselves. And I don't know, I think it's like the more you know, the more you're responsible for. So if you know the scriptures really well and you've been walking this out, you're going to be responsible for more and more and more as you go. And when people are brought to you for you to help and for you to minister to, you're more and more, you have to be more and more careful about how you're ministering to them and, watching your words and stuff. And he's corrected me a lot on TikTok with this, about being very careful about how I respond to comments sometimes and just not responding to certain people. And that was a hard process to learn those lessons, because a lot of times I would be getting into debates with straight up demons, right? Like people that they're not even, some of the people on TikTok that are frustrating you are not even real accounts. They're just demonic. They're just demonic fronts. I run into demons on TikTok several times. They have their own accounts. They can go through the internet. I know this sounds crazy. I've had conversations with people in the comments on TikTok, and then I clued in because I'll look at their username, and their username will usually tell you who they are, and it will be like a literal name of a demon, and the picture will be a picture of a demon. And I'll go to their account and I'll look, and they'll be following like 2 people, right? Or no followers at all, or it's a brand new account. And this person, I've just been arguing with this person for half an hour, giving them all my energy, giving them all my time, and it's not even a real person, I've had this happen so many times. So, pray before you engage with people, because sometimes these people that you're engaging with they're not even real people. I know you guys have probably seen those like phone farms in Asia and stuff. Like sometimes they're just AI. Sometimes you're just fighting with AI, right? What are you gonna do? Fight with AI all day? What's the point? Right? So I always pray and ask, like, Abba, do you want me to respond to this person? Do you want me to talk to this person? And sometimes he'll really press me to like engage with somebody, and sometimes he'll say no, walk away. It doesn't matter. Or if I see the spirit of pride really cropping up, you can see the spirit of pride crop up in people, then I'll disengage at that point, because there's no point arguing with the spirit, right? So yeah, that's kind of been my process. And it's evolved so he had me learning for 3-4 years, right? Learning the scriptures fully fully learning the scriptures. And then that's after that point, that's when he allowed me to be in ministry. Okay. So there's a lot of people that are kind of jumping the gun and they're posting on TikTok, and I get like sharing your testimony is good and stuff, and sharing what you're learning is good, but they get really prideful in what their knowledge is and their knowledge level, but they haven't really been anointed to be in ministry. There's a difference between trying to force a ministry and trying to force yourself into a position. That's what we just learned in the Torah portion of Korah last week, is Korah was trying to force himself in a position he wasn't ordained to be in. He wasn't supposed to be doing that position, right? And so there's a lot of people on the internet, because it's so easy to have a platform on the internet, and they're trying to force themselves into this position that they were never, and maybe they have a ministry in them, but it's not the ministry that they're trying to do. Maybe they have a ministry, like we all have something, some kind of greater purpose that we're supposed to do. But we have to ask Abba what our purpose is and what our gifts are and what he wants us to do. This is not something I would have chosen for myself. I know a lot of people would have chosen this for themselves. They would have said, oh, I want a big account. I want to do this. I want to do that. For me, it's not. I'm an introvert. It's not my thing. It takes me a lot to post videos. It takes me a lot to come on here and start talking. But usually when I come on and I start, then the Holy Spirit comes and I can keep going and I have that energy. It's just like that initial, like making myself do it is really difficult, because I am an introvert. I do like to spend time alone. I do recharge when I'm on my own. And I think that's why he chooses, people that maybe don't want to do certain jobs to do jobs that they don't want to do, that they necessarily wouldn't want to do, because then they're not going to be prideful about it. I know that I didn't put myself here. I know that I didn't do this out of my own strength. I know that he wanted me here specifically doing specific things that he trained me specifically to be able to do. It had nothing to do with my brain or being smart or anything else. The brain that he gave me hinders me in every other area of life except for this. Seeing pattern connections everywhere and having that ability to see connections and patterns everywhere is not necessarily helpful in the regular world, right? But it is very helpful in looking at scripture and seeing the shadow pictures and the way that things play out in scripture. That is what he gave me a specifically designed brain for. That for most of my life has been made my life harder, right? But he's designed each of us for a very specific purpose, for a very specific reason. And so we all have to seek him on what that purpose and the reason is, and what our job to do is. And everyone has a different job to do. And some jobs, some jobs are your family. Some jobs are taking care of your own family and all sorts of things, right? I truly believe that he didn't allow me to have a husband because he knows that I would be very devoted and I would not. And so this is the other thing too, is I would not be here doing this at all. I would not be here doing this probably at all. I would have never gotten to this place if I would have had a husband this whole time, right? So if he would have let me have that, it would have kept me from doing this. 100% it would have. This would not look the way that it does if he had allowed that, right? And now he is moving me into some things now, but I can't talk about them yet. So yeah, that's my testimony and how I ended up here on TikTok, on your feeds, and what he's been doing. And I left a whole bunch of it out, but I hope you enjoyed it. I will post it on YouTube. So it will be up on YouTube, the whole thing. I'll post it probably in 2 parts. The first part of my salvation and the second part of walking in Torah, probably. This is going to be long. Anyway, so if you have any questions or things you want to ask or talk about, let me know. We got restricted at some point. Yeah, we did get restricted. So I'll have to, when I post this on YouTube, I'm gonna have to go through and beep out the words that I used that got us restricted. Yeah, there's so much more to my story that I haven't shared in here. Obviously, it's like a long story, but we can't cover it all in one. There's just so many little things that have happened over the years. You know how it is. It's like almost hard to explain, like all the little things that have happened and that have brought you to the place that you are. And to know that Abba had his hand on you, you know, the whole time. He's had his hand on my life, directing my path this entire time in so many little ways that there's no way that it's not him, right? Like things that don't even make sense, you know, like me wanting to know Middle East politics at the age of 12. That doesn't make sense, right? Logically, right? Oh, I forgot to tell you guys too. So a few months ago, I was visiting my grandma here. I'm visiting my grandma, and this will kind of wrap up this story. A few months ago, I'm visiting my grandma here, and we're just chatting casually, and she's like talking about her family and, you know, when they came over to Canada and stuff like that. And she's like, oh yeah, my dad and his brother were in a concentration camp. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, my dad and my brother were in a concentration camp. And I was like, oh, I never knew that. So this whole time growing up, our family never discussed it, that her dad and her brother were in a concentration camp for years. Her dad obviously made it out because he was able to move to Canada. I'm not sure the story with his brother, what happened. But I find it very interesting. So it's in my DNA somewhere. I will not get a DNA test though, because that's not I will not be sending my DNA in anywhere ever. But yeah. And that was kind of like, how did our family never talk about this? I think that's what happened to a lot of families too, is that the war was so hard and all of that stuff was so hard that it just wasn't discussed. It's like, just move on, you know? Have a lovely night and Shabbat Shalom. Love to you all. Talk to you later.